September 1943. Somewhere in the fog-wrapped hills of England, American airmen prepared for another brutal day over occupied Europe. But at Base 47, the joke of the squadron wasn't the enemy. It was one of their own. The mess hall reeked of burnt coffee and cigarette smoke. Lieutenant James Jimmy Callahan sat alone at the far end of the long wooden table, poking at his powdered eggs with a fork that had seen better days. At 24, he should have been in his prime, but the way the other pilots looked at him, you'd think he was already washed up. "Hey, Callahan." A voice cut through the low rumble of conversation. It was Captain Derek Hutchins, the squadron's golden boy. 32 confirmed kills, a jawline that could cut glass, and an ego to match. "You planning on actually flying today, or just warming that bench again?" Laughter rippled across the hall. Jimmy's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Come on, Hutch. Leave him alone," said Lieutenant Tommy Rizzo, though even his defense sounded half-hearted. Tommy was a good guy, but even good guys didn't want to be associated with failure. "I'm just saying," Hutchins continued, leaning back in his chair with a grin. 3 aborted missions in 2 weeks. That's got to be some kind of record. Jimmy's knuckles whitened around his fork. The first mission, his landing gear had malfunctioned, legitimate mechanical failure. The second, severe engine trouble forced him back. The third was harder to explain. He'd frozen up there, 20,000 feet above the channel, watching tracer fire slice through the clouds like deadly fireflies. His hands had locked on the stick. By the time he'd snapped out of it, he'd fallen out of formation and had to turn back. "Mechanical issues," Jimmy muttered, his voice barely audible. "Right, mechanical." Hutchins smirked. "Or maybe you just don't have the stomach for it." Before Jimmy could respond, the door banged open. Colonel Marcus Brennan strode in, a man carved from oak and old wars, his gray hair buzzed military short, his face a roadmap of scars and hard decisions. "Listen up." Brennan's voice could have stripped paint. The room fell silent instantly. "We've got orders. Big push tomorrow, 0600 hours. Schweinfurt ball bearing plants. Intelligence says it's heavily defended. Flat corridors thick as soup, and Jerry's got his best fighter stationed nearby." A collective groan. Schweinfurt had earned its reputation as a meat grinder. "Every available bird goes up," Brennan continued, his eyes sweeping the room. They landed on Jimmy for a half second, just long enough to convey disappointment. No excuses, no mechanical failures. "We need every bomber in the air and every fighter covering them." Dismissed. As the men filed out, Brennan called back Callahan. "My office. Now." The colonel's office was Spartan. A desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered with maps marked with red pins showing losses. Too many red pins. "Sit," Brennan ordered. Jimmy sat. Brennan didn't waste time. "I'm pulling you from tomorrow's mission." The words hit like a physical blow. "Sir, I can—" "You can what?" Brennan's voice was cold. "You can abort again. You can put other men at risk covering for you. The mechanical failures were real, sir. The reports." "I've read the reports, Lieutenant, and I've also read between the lines." Brennan leaned forward, his eyes hard. "You know what the men call you. The Mockingbird. Because you look like a pilot. You dress like a pilot. But when it counts, you're just making noise." Jimmy's face burned with shame. "I've got 18-year-old kids out there flying into hell without flinching," Brennan continued. "And I've got you, a trained pilot with more hours than half my squadron, finding reasons to stay on the ground. I should ground you permanently. Send you back stateside to push papers." "Sir, please." "But I won't." Brennan sighed, and for a moment, the hardness cracked, revealing the exhaustion beneath. "Not yet. You'll stay on base tomorrow. If, and that's a big if, you can prove yourself on smaller runs, maybe we'll reconsider. But until then, you're benched." "Yes, sir," Jimmy whispered. Dismissed. That night, Jimmy lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling while the sounds of snoring and restless sleep filled the barracks. On the small metal shelf beside his bed sat a photograph, a smiling woman with dark curls, holding a baby, his wife, Eleanor and their daughter, Sarah. He'd last seen them 14 months ago. "You come back to us, Jimmy Callahan," Eleanor had whispered at the train station, her voice fierce despite the tears. "You hear me? You come back." But how could he go back like this? A failure, a mockingbird. Tomorrow, men he knew, Tommy, even the insufferable Hutchins, would climb into their planes and fly into a storm of steel and fire. And he'd be here, safe on the ground, drowning in shame. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, memories did, unwelcome and vivid, the tracers streaking past his canopy. The sound of metal tearing when Schmidt's plane took a direct hit last month, spiraling down in flames while Schmidt screamed over the radio. The screaming had lasted 7 seconds. 7 seconds that played on loop in Jimmy's nightmares. Outside, the English rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not, and somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the fear and shame, something else stirred, something that felt like anger. At Hutchins, at Brennan, at himself. "I'm not useless," he thought, his hands balling into fists. "I'm not." But the darkness didn't answer back. At 0530 hours, the engines would roar to life. The bombers would lumber down the runway, heavy with bombs and hope. The fighters would follow, climbing into the gray dawn. And James Callahan would watch on the ground, carrying a burden heavier than any aircraft, the weight of his own doubt. But fate has a way of choosing its moments. And for Jimmy Callahan, that moment was coming faster than anyone could have imagined. 0545 hours. September 24th, 1943. The sky was still bruised with night when the first engines coughed to life. Jimmy Callahan stood by the control tower, a cup of cold coffee in his hands, watching his squadron prepare to fly into history. Without him, the airfield was organized chaos. Ground crews swarmed around the B-17 flying fortresses like ants around giants, loading ammunition belts, checking fuel lines, blessing machines that would soon carry men into the teeth of hell. The fighters, sleek P-47 Thunderbolts, sat waiting, their propellers glinting in the pre-dawn light. Jimmy watched Captain Hutchins climb into his cockpit, that trademark swagger visible even from 50 yards away. Tommy Rizzo gave him a wave from his plane, sympathetic, pitying. Jimmy forced himself to wave back. "Rough morning, Lieutenant." The voice belonged to Sergeant Frank Morrison, a grizzled crew chief who'd been fixing planes since before Jimmy was born. His weathered face was kind, but his eyes had seen too many young men not come back. Something like that, "Sarge." Jimmy replied. Morrison followed his gaze to the line of aircraft. "You know, I've been doing this job 17 years. Fixed birds for 3 wars. And I can tell you something about fear." Jimmy tensed. "I'm not." "Easy, son. I ain't calling you yellow." Morrison lit a cigarette, the match flaring orange in the gloom. "Fear keeps you alive. It's the men who ain't scared that worry me. They're the ones who take stupid chances, get themselves and their wingmen killed." He exhaled smoke. "The question ain't whether you're scared. It's what you do with it." Before Jimmy could respond, the tower radio crackled to life. Colonel Brennan's voice boomed across the field. "All aircraft, you are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed, gentlemen." One by one, the bombers lumbered down the runway, their massive frames defying gravity through sheer determination and American engineering. The fighters followed, 12 P-47s, including Hutchins' lead fighter with its painted shark teeth grinning wickedly. Within 10 minutes, the sky was empty. The roar of engines faded to an echo, then to silence. Jimmy stood there long after they'd gone, the coffee cup forgotten in his hands. 0947 hours. Base operations room. Jimmy had volunteered for radio duty. Anything to be useful, to feel connected to the mission. The operations room was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Maps covered every wall. Radio operators hunched over their equipment, headphones clamped tight, transcribing the crackling voices from across the channel. Baker leadered a tower, entering German airspace. Heavy flak at Angels 20. No fighter contact yet. Colonel Brennan stood behind the operators, his face carved from stone, listening to his men fly into danger while he remained safe on the ground. Jimmy understood that particular hell now. The minutes crawled by. Updates came in fragments. Fighters at 3 o'clock high. Taking fire, taking fire. Baker 3 is hit, losing altitude. Each transmission made Jimmy's stomach tighten. He recognized the voices. These weren't strangers. They were men he'd eaten breakfast with, men who'd mocked him and pitted him and still called him brother. 1,015 hours. Tower, this is Eagle Leader. Hutchins' voice, strained but controlled. Target acquired. Beginning bombing run. Flak is, Jesus, it's heavy. Lost visual on Eagle 4. The radio operator's hand shook as he wrote. Eagle 4 was Lieutenant David Park, 22 years old, engaged to a girl from Brooklyn. Then the radio exploded with noise, overlapping voices, shouts, static that sounded like tearing metal. Broke through. 6109's on R6. Need cover. Where's our cover? Baker 2 is going down. Can't shake him, can't shake him. Brennan's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. There was nothing to say. They could only listen. 1,127 hours. Tower, Eagle Leader. Hutchins' voice was ragged now, barely audible over engine noise and wind. Mission accomplished. Bombs on target. But we've got a problem. Real big problem. Brennan grabbed a headset. Eagle Leader, this is Tower Actual. Report. Sir, we're down to 8 fighters. For confirmed lost. And a long pause filled with static and the sound of labored breathing. Sir, Baker 1 took multiple hits. Half the formation is badly damaged. We've got wounded, we got systems failures, and we got approximately 200 miles of very angry Germany between us and home. Understood, Eagle Leader. What's your fuel status? Another pause. This one felt heavier. That's the problem, sir. Running on fumes. We used everything in the dogfight. Some of us won't make it across the channel. The room went dead quiet. Everyone understood what that meant. Ditching the channel in September, water temperature around 50 degrees. Even with life vests, hypothermia would kill them in 20 minutes. Maybe 30 if they were lucky. How many birds are critical? Brennan asked, his voice carefully controlled. 3 fighters, including mine. At least 2 bombers won't make it back without fighter escort to the Flak corridor at Calais. Sir, Hutchins' voice cracked just slightly. We need a miracle. 1,131 hours. Brennan slammed down the headset and turned to his operations officer. What do we have available? Anything that can fly? Sir, everything's already up. We're tapped out. What about reserve aircraft? We've got 1 P-47 in reserve, but it's... The officer hesitated. Sir, it was scheduled for maintenance. The supercharger's been acting up, and the fuel mixture's running rich. We grounded it yesterday. Can it fly? Technically, yes, but... Then get it ready. Now! Sir, who would fly it? Everyone's all ready. Brennan's eyes swept the room and landed on Jimmy. For 3 long seconds, neither man moved. Then Brennan said quietly, Callahan. Jimmy's heart stopped. Sir, you heard me, Lieutenant. You're all we've got. Brennan walked over, his voice low enough that only Jimmy could hear. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're scared of. But right now, 12 bombers and 8 fighters are limping home, and some of them won't make it without help. I'm not asking if you're ready. I'm asking if you're willing. Jimmy's mind raced. Every fear, every doubt. Every nightmare screamed at him to refuse. The mechanical failures, the frozen moments, the screams on the radio. But then he heard Hutchins' voice again in his mind. We need a miracle. And he thought of Eleanor and Sarah, of the photograph by his bed, of the promise he'd made. Come back to us. Maybe coming back didn't just mean surviving. Maybe it meant becoming someone worth coming back to. I'll fly, Jimmy heard himself say. His voice was steady, even though his hands weren't. Brennan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect? Hope? Then move, Lieutenant. You've got 15 minutes to get in the air. 1,143 hours. Flight line. Sergeant Morrison and his crew had worked a miracle of their own. The P-47 sat ready, engine warmed, ammunition loaded. But Morrison's face was grim. "She'll fly," he said, helping Jimmy into his flight suit. "But that supercharger's temperamental. Don't push her past 25,000 feet or you'll lose power. And the fuel mixture, you'll burn through faster than usual. You've got maybe 90 minutes of flight time." "Maybe." "Understood, Sarge." Morrison grabbed Jimmy's shoulder, looked him dead in the eye. "You bring my bird back, Callahan. And bring yourself back, too." "I'll try." "Don't try. Do." 1,147 hours. Jimmy strapped into the cockpit, his hands moving through the pre-flight checklist on autopilot. Toggle switches, gauges, stick response. Everything was mechanical, procedural, safe. Until he pushed the throttle forward and felt the engine roar to life beneath him. Then it became real. The tower cleared him immediately. No time for fear, no time for doubt. The runway stretched ahead like a path into the unknown. Jimmy took a deep breath, thought of Eleanor's face, and pushed the throttle to full. The P-47 leaped forward, gathering speed, the runway blurring beneath him. The stick pulled back. The wheels left the earth. And Jimmy Callahan was airborne, climbing into a gray sky, alone, chasing ghosts and redemption somewhere over the English Channel. 23 minutes of fuel, 200 miles of hostile sky, and somewhere ahead, men he barely knew but called brothers were fighting to stay alive. The Mockingbird was about to find his voice. 1,203 hours, 18,000 feet above the English Channel. Lieutenant James Callahan was alone in the sky, and for the first time in months, his hands were steady. The P-47 cut through scattered clouds like a knife through silk. Below, the channel stretched out in endless gray, white caps breaking across the surface like scattered bones. Jimmy checked his instruments. Fuel gauge already showing the burn Morrison had warned about. 70 minutes. Maybe less. The radio crackled in his headset. "Any Allied aircraft?" "This is Baker 1. We are approximately 30 miles from English coast. Angels 1-8, heading 270. Taking sporadic flak. Request immediate fighter support." That voice, Major Robert Chun, the bomber formation leader. Jimmy had never flown with him, but everyone knew Chun. 38 years old, wife and 3 kids back in California. The kind of man who wrote letters home every single day without fail. Jimmy keyed his mic. "Baker 1, this is Eagle 6. I'm 20 miles south of your position, coming in hot. ETA 8 minutes. A pause. Then Chen's voice, cautious and hopeful. "Eagle 6, confirm you're alone?" "Affirmative, Baker 1. It's just me." Another pause. Jimmy could almost hear the calculations, the doubts. One fighter against whatever was waiting out there. "Copy that. Eagle 6. We'll take what we can get. Fair warning. We got 3 Me-109 shadowing us. They're waiting for us to hit the flak corridor at Calais. That's where they'll strike." "Understood. I'm coming." 1,211 hours. Jimmy saw them before his radio confirmed it. A ragged formation of B-17s. 12 massive bombers struggling through the sky like wounded birds. Several trailed smoke. One had his entire tail section peppered with holes the size of basketballs. Another flew with only 3 engines, the fourth a charred stump. And circling above them, patient as vultures, 3 German Me-109s, their yellow noses marking them as veterans from JG-26, one of the Luftwaffe's elite units. Jimmy's throat went dry. 3 against 1. In training, they'd call that suicide odds. But training was a long time ago, and the men in those bombers didn't care about odds. He pushed the throttle forward, climbing hard. The supercharger whined, that problematic component Morrison had warned about, but held. 22,000 feet. 23,000. The Me-109s hadn't spotted him yet, too focused on their prey below. Jimmy came out of the sun, just like the instructors had taught him a lifetime ago. His thumb found the gun trigger. 8.50 caliber machine guns, 425 rounds per gun. Enough to make a difference. If he didn't freeze. The lead Me, 109 filled his gun sight, Closer. The black cross on its fuselage sharp and clear. Jimmy's breath caught. His finger tightened. Schmidt's plane, spiraling down in flames. 7 seconds of screaming. The memory hit like a fist. His hand trembled. Then, through the roar of the engine and the blood pounding in his ears, he heard another voice. Not a memory. Not a ghost. Eleanor's voice from that day at the station. "You come back to us." Jimmy Callahan. His hand steadied. Jimmy squeezed the trigger. The P-47 shuddered as 8 machine guns opened up simultaneously, tracers streaking to the air in brilliant orange lines. The Me-109 never knew what hit it. Rounds chewed through its left wing, tearing metal and severing control cables. The German fighter rolled violently, trailing black smoke, and fell away toward the channel below. Eagle 6 could kill. Chen's voice, energized. 2 more breaking left. The remaining Me-109 scattered, surprised but far from beaten. These weren't rookies. They split. Classic tactics, forcing Jimmy to choose which threat to pursue while the others circled around. Jimmy chose neither. Instead, he pulled up hard, using the P-47's superior power to climb above both Germans. The supercharger screamed in protest. 24,000 feet, pushing the limit Morrison had set, but Jimmy needed the altitude advantage. The Germans climbed after him, but the P-47 was faster. At 25,000 feet, Jimmy rolled inverted and dove. The world became a blur of sky and sea. G-forces crushed him into his seat. The airspeed indicator spun past 400 miles per hour, then 450. The wings shook. Metal groaned. One Me-109 followed him down. The other broke off. Smart pilot knew better than to follow a P-47 into a power dive. At 15,000 feet, Jimmy pulled out, the world graying at the edges as blood drained from his brain. The Me-109 behind him pulled out too, but slower, its lighter frame struggling with the forces. That hesitation was fatal. Jimmy snap-rolled, cut throttle, let the German overshoot, a maneuver called the yo-yo that existed more in theory than practice. But desperation made experts of everyone. The Me-109 flashed past, now in front of him. Jimmy fired. Rounds stitched across the German's cockpit. The canopy shattered. The fighter rolled, sluggish, and began its final descent. Brake right. Brake right. Hutchins' voice, urgent and panicked, exploded in Jimmy's headset. Jimmy rolled hard right, felt more than saw cannon rounds zip through the space where he'd just been. The third Me-109, the smart one, had circled back. Jimmy's heart hammered. He was too slow, the German pilot too good. The Me-109 was on his 6, lining up for the kill shot. Then 8 P-47s came screaming out of cloud layer like avenging angels. Hutchins led the formation, his guns blazing. The German fighter broke hard, abandoning his attack on Jimmy to face this new threat. But he was outnumbered and outgunned. Within 30 seconds, he was spinning toward the water, his pilot bailing out, parachute blossoming white against the gray sky. Eagle 6. Hutchins' voice came through, and for once, there was no mockery in it. You just saved our asses. We were running on fumes. Thought we'd have to watch them pick off the bombers one by one. Jimmy's breath came in ragged gasps, adrenaline crashing through his system. Glad I could help, Eagle Leader. Help? Son, you just took on 3 Jerrys alone. A pause. That took guts. Before Jimmy could respond, Chen's voice cut in. All Eagles, this is Baker 1. We've got bigger problems. The lead bomber, Baker 7, just reported his pilots unconscious, co-pilots wounded, and they're losing altitude. They won't make it home without help. 1,224 hours. Baker 7 was dying. Jimmy could see it as he pulled alongside. The entire nose section was shredded, the plexiglass blown out. Inside, he could make out 2 figures slumped over the controls. The bomber was in shallow dive, slowly spiraling downward. Baker 7, this is Eagle 6, do you read? Static. Baker 7, if anyone can hear me, respond. More static. Then, barely audible, a young voice, trembling, terrified. This is This is Sergeant Billy Foster, waist gunner. Lieutenant Harris is unconscious. Co-pilot Brooks is hit bad, and I don't know how to fly this thing. Jimmy's mind raced. The B-17 was at 12,000 feet and dropping. In 10 minutes, maybe less, it would hit the water. 5 men still alive on board, according to Foster's panic report. Foster, listen to me. Can you get to the cockpit? I think so. Oh, God, there's so much blood. Focus, Foster. Can you get to the controls? Yes, I'm here. Good. Now, do exactly what I tell you. You see the control wheel in front of the pilot's seat? The big wheel thing? Yeah. Put your hands on it. Pull back, gently, and tell me what happens. Through the canopy, Jimmy watched the bomber's nose slowly rise as Foster pulled. Too much. The B-17 shuddered on the edge of a stall. Okay, push forward a little. Not too much. Find a spot where the plane feels steady. Like this. The bomber leveled out, roughly, but leveled 10,000 feet. Holding. Perfect. Now listen carefully. I'm going to guide you home. It's going to be okay. I'm 18 years old. Foster's voice cracked. I'm from Nebraska. I'm a gunner. I don't know how to. I'm 24 and from Ohio, and 3 hours ago everyone thought I was too scared to fly. Jimmy cut in, his voice firm but kind. Right now, you're the bravest man in this sky. You hear me, Foster? A shaky breath. Yes, sir. Good. Now, we're going to do this together. You and me. I'll be right here the whole way. 1,251 hours. The English coast appeared to the haze. White cliffs of Dover. Beautiful and impossible. The bomber formation had already crossed over, climbing to safety. Hutchins and 3 other fighters remained, circling Baker 7 like protective hawks. Tower, this is Eagle 6, Jimmy transmitted. We're coming in with Baker 7. Pilot unconscious. Co-pilot critical. Aircraft being flown by a waist gunner with no flight experience. We need emergency services. Standing by. Brennan's voice came back immediately. Copy, Eagle 6. Field is cleared. All other traffic diverted. You're cleared for a straight-in approach runway 27. Emergency crews are standing by. Jimmy looked at his fuel gauge. 10 minutes. Maybe. Foster, you still with me? Still here. Eagle 6. I can see land. Good man. Now comes the hard part. We're going to land this bird. Land? Sir, I can't. Yes, you can. I'm going to walk you through every step. First, find the throttle levers. There should be 4 of them, about this long. Jimmy held up his hand, knowing Foster couldn't see it, then described it better. Metal levers between the 2 seats. Found them. Excellent. Now, how many engines do you have running? A pause. 3, I think. Number 2 is dead. 3 engines. Asymmetric thrust. This was going to be tricky. 1,258 hours. Final approach. Base 47 stretched out below them, the runway a gray ribbon cutting through green fields. Jimmy flew alongside Baker 7, close enough to see Foster through the shattered nose. A kid with round face, covered in someone else's blood, hands white-knuckled on control wheel. Okay, Foster. See that runway? I see it. We're going to aim for the near end. Pull back those throttle levers, slowly, and let the plane descend. Don't fight it. The plane wants to land, you just guide it. The B-17 dropped nose high, too fast. Throttle up, give it a little power. Foster overcorrected. The bomber surged forward. Okay, he's back. Find the balance. Down below, fire trucks and ambulances lined the runway. Jimmy could see Colonel Brennan, standing on the tower platform, binoculars raised. 8,000 feet, 6,000 feet, the runway growing larger. When I say flare, pull back on the wheel. Not too much, just enough to raise the nose. That'll slow you down before the wheels touch. When do I flare? I'll tell you. Trust me. 4,000 feet, 3,000 feet. Jimmy's fuel gauge read 0. His engine coughed once. Any second now, it would quit. 2,000 feet. The B-17 wobbled. Foster's inexperience showing, but staying more or less on course. 1,000 feet, 500 feet. Flare, pull back now. Foster pulled. The B-17's nose rose, bleeding off speed. The massive bomber dropped toward the runway. 50 feet, 30 feet, 20. The main wheels hit hard, bounced once, hit again. The tail will slam down. Metal screamed. The bomber veered left, Foster overcorrecting on the rudder, but stayed on the pavement. It rolled and finally, blessedly, stopped. Jimmy's engine died. Completely. He was at 800 feet with no power, the runway already behind him. For a split second, panic clawed at him. Then training took over. He aimed for the grass beside the runway, pulled back to bleed off speed, and braced for impact. The P-47 hit the field wheels first, bounced hard, and plowed through 200 feet of English grass before shuddering to a stop, nose down in the soft earth. Jimmy sat there, breath ragged, heart pounding, alive. 1,305 hours. Base 47 airfield. By the time Jimmy climbed out his cockpit, half the base had surrounded Baker 7. Medical crews pulled the wounded from the bomber. Billy Foster emerged last, legs barely holding him, and collapsed in the arms of a medic who kept saying, "You did it, kid. You did it." Jimmy walked toward the crowd on shaking legs, his flight suit soaked with sweat. Then the crowd parted, and Captain Hutchins stepped forward. For a long moment, the two men just looked at each other. Then Hutchins extended his hand. "I was wrong about you, Callahan," he said quietly. "Dead wrong." Jimmy took his hand. "I was wrong about me, too." A slow smile crossed Hutchins' face. "You know what they're going to call you now?" "What?" "The guardian angel of Base 47. Hutchins clapped him on the shoulder. "You saved 12 bombers, fought off 3 Me-109s, and talked a kid through landing a cripple B-17. That's not Mockingbird work. That's Eagle work." Before Jimmy could respond, Colonel Brennan pushed through the crowd. His face was unreadable as he stopped in front of Jimmy. Then, slowly, he saluted. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant. You just earned yourself a spot back in the rotation, and a recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross." Jimmy returned the salute, throat tight. "Thank you, sir." Brennan's stern expression cracked into something almost resembling a smile. "Also, you owe Sergeant Morrison a new supercharger, and possibly a bottle of whiskey." Laughter rippled through the crowd. That evening, Jimmy sat alone in the barracks, pen in hand, staring at blank paper. Around him, the sound of celebration continued. Men who'd flown into hell and come back alive, determined to squeeze every drop of life from the moment. Finally, he began to write. "Dear Eleanor, today I became the pilot I always should have been. Today, I found out that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's flying anyway. Today, I remember why I'm here and what I'm fighting for. I'm coming home to you and Sarah. That's a promise. But I'm not coming home as the man who left. I'm coming home as someone you'll be proud of. All my love, Jimmy." He sealed the envelope, addressed it, and placed it on the pile for tomorrow's mail run. Outside, the sun was setting over Base 47, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Tomorrow, there would be another mission. More danger, more fear. But tonight, James Jimmy Callahan, no longer the Mockingbird, now the guardian angel, allowed himself to breathe. He'd found his wings. And that changed everything. In the skies above Europe, legends were born not from fearlessness, but from men who flew despite their fear. James Callahan had been mocked as useless, but when it mattered most, when lives hung in the balance, he became exactly what his brothers needed: a guardian in the storm, an angel in the darkness, a pilot who proved that redemption is earned one flight at a time. His final flight didn't end his story. It began it. Lieutenant James Callahan flew 47 more combat missions before the war ended. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and the undying respect of every man who served at Base 47. He returned home to Eleanor and Sarah in November 1945. He never spoke much about the war, but every September 24th, he raised a glass to Baker 7, and a kid from Nebraska who learned to fly when it mattered most. Billy Foster survived the war, went to college on the GI Bill, became a high school teacher, and named his first son James. Captain Derek Hutchins survived too. He and Jimmy became lifelong friends. At Hutchins' funeral in 1987, Jimmy gave a eulogy and called him the best wingman a man could ask for. Colonel Brennan wrote in his memoirs, "I've commanded thousands of men, but Lieutenant Callahan taught me something I never forgot, that sometimes a measure of a man isn't how he starts the race, but whether he finishes it." Base 47 closed in 1946, but the stories remained, and among them, the story of the Mockingbird who learned to fly.